Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm your chair for today. My name is Shalini Arora. I'm a founding trustee of Belong. Could I ask everyone to introduce yourselves through the chat function so that we can see who's here and also so that you can make connections? And do feel free to tweet about the event today using the hashtag, which is also in the chat section. To let you all know, we are recording this webinar today and it will be uploaded onto the Belong website. So we will be using the chat to make introductions to each other, and if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A section and our moderator will pick out questions which our panelists will answer after they have spoken. The vision of the Belong network is a more integrated and less divided society. Belong aims to be UK's leading membership organisation on social cohesion and integration, offering academic research, consultancy, training, networking, thought leadership and events for members across the public, private and charitable sector in the UK. One of the things that Belong aims to do is bring expertise and thinking on social cohesion and integration to different sectors and different audiences. And this work very much fits that pattern. We are here today to launch Everybody's Business, the role that business can play in supporting cohesive communities. This report has been based on a series of roundtables we held at the end of 2021 with local authority partners in West Yorkshire, Manchester and Swansea, and a range of businesses that work in these areas to ask what business was already doing to support social cohesion and what more, working in partnership with local government, it could do. This report today is about capturing what we have learned from this, showing some examples of good practice and setting out some ideas and guiding principles for the role of business in supporting cohesive communities and how local authorities can support them in this. Belong would like to thank Intercultural Cities Network for their funding of this work and their partnership in bringing it forward. We would also like to extend a special thanks to all of those who sat on the oversight panel for their expert guidance and support on this project. And above all, we would like to thank Ralph Scott, a Belong associate and researcher at the University of Manchester, who authored this report and pulled it together. I'm now going to hand over to Joe Broadwood to present the report in a second. And then after this, we have a fantastic panel of speakers to share their thoughts on the report. Our speakers are Lord Steve Bassam, Amelia Quist, Nizam Edin, Katie Nightingale, and Julie Jones. But first of all, over to Joe to present the report. Joe is the CEO of Belong and has a background as a community cohesion advisor for central government, working alongside groups and communities supporting social mixing. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks very much, Shalini. Welcome, a really warm welcome to everybody. We're really delighted to be able to present this report today. I'm just going to share my screen. Whilst I'm doing that, please do take an opportunity to introduce yourselves in the chat to each other. We've got some great people on the webinar, so please do feel free to introduce yourselves. So Shalini said a little bit already about Belong. We are a charity and membership network. We're really proud to have our home in Manchester, to have Savannah Wisdom Foundation and Manchester City Council as founding members of the network. We work for a more connected and less divided society, one where there is strong trust and strong social connections and relationships between different groups. We're deliberately cross-sectoral because we want to break down some of the silos, if you like, between different sectors across society. We're very much evidence and research led. And we do three things really. We connect and convene people, so we bring together people and organisations with knowledge and good practice in order to improve local places so that they become more socially cohesive and resilient. We provide resources and toolkits based on the latest evidence and research in terms of what works. And with our members, we advocate for social cohesion work, which we see as vital to a range of different kind of policy areas. We've been working very closely with the Intercultural Cities Network on this project. The Intercultural Cities Network is run by the Council of Europe, which is Europe's leading human rights organisation, and ICC enables cities to explore and apply policies that harness diversity for personal and societal development. And they do that through reviewing policies through an intercultural lens and developing strategies to help realise what they call the diversity advantage. And we're really pleased to have worked with ICC and ICC cities in the UK to develop this piece of work. What do we mean by social cohesion? So social cohesion is quite a contested term in many ways. What we mean by it, we think it's everybody's business for a start off. And we think it's a term that describes how well people from different backgrounds mix, interact and get along with each other. It's about developing neighbourhoods, workplaces, institutions and social spaces where difference is welcomed and celebrated, and that moves beyond narratives of us and them towards ideas of trust, shared identity and a sense of belonging. We often talk about social cohesion as being like the invisible social glue that we only notice by its absence. And it's something that really needs to be maintained and attended to over time, because social cohesion is different in different local places, and different factors will either strengthen it or deplete it depending on a range of local, national and international events and influencing factors. And these are some of the things that we think make cohesive communities. So trust is really important, trust in local government and institutions, trust in each other, being proactive about tackling discrimination and prejudice, really encouraging social mixing between different groups, because we know that the evidence tells us that the more people interact with people from backgrounds that are different to their own, then the more likely prejudice is to be reduced and empathy and understanding to be developed. And the other element that makes a great deal of difference is around people being actively engaged in their local area, because that's a sign, if you like, that people really care about and are proud of the place that they live. And I think cohesion's got a huge amount of relevance in terms of the current policy agenda around levelling up. So the Levelling Up white paper identifies 6 forms of capital which are crucial for levelling up, and I think social cohesion plays a vital role in at least 2, definitely in terms of social capital, where it's about trust and strong relationships between and within communities, and institutional capital, where local leadership and the capability and capacity of local leadership is developed. And I think the other thing to say about social cohesion is that it generates enormous and often unrecognised social value. So with other research that Belong has been conducting across the country, we've been conducting a longitudinal study on the impact of COVID-19 on social cohesion. So we've been surveying different areas since May 2020. And in particular, we've surveyed 6 local authorities which all have invested in cohesion. And what we discovered is that they have had significantly high levels of resilience in the face of some of the challenges of the pandemic. People there were twice as likely to volunteer as elsewhere. There was a higher sense of neighbourliness, higher levels of trust in local government's response to COVID. They maintained more positive attitudes about migrants to the UK. There were higher levels of subjective well-being and higher levels of optimism. So investing in social cohesion is really important because it relates to a lot of the kind of key challenges that we're facing at the moment. So this piece of work, Everybody's Business, we wanted to really investigate the role that business can play in supporting cohesive communities, because we feel that business is often left out of the conversation about social cohesion, but that they can play an enormously important role. So over the last sort of 5 or 6 months, we've been working with a fantastic oversight panel led by Shalini, plus the Intercultural Cities Network in the UK, and a range of different businesses. And we've convened a series of roundtables in Manchester, in West Yorkshire with 4 of the councils that make up West Yorkshire, and with Swansea Council. And in total, over 30 different businesses took part, and these ranged from multinational businesses to small and micro businesses from a range of different sectors, from construction, accountancy, beauty, energy, electronics, manufacturing. And then the local authorities themselves were really well represented in that they had a range of different contexts for social cohesion with their own place-based challenges and priorities. The questions we asked were, what role does or can business play to develop that fully inclusive integrated workforce that fully represents local communities and brings people from different backgrounds together, that can help support community life and build social infrastructure, and that can help bring local communities closer together and to bridge divides. And we roughly divided it into things that business can do which are more internally focused, and things that business can do that is more externally focused out into their local community. And then finally, we looked at what can local government do to support, enable and encourage this. And the workshops threw up a real range of fantastic examples of good practice, and I'm really pleased to have a couple of those examples represented on the panel today. And those helped inform the recommendations that are in this report. We can't reference them all, but I think it's useful to highlight some of them and the overall picture of the types of good work which are already happening. We found a number of powerful examples of really valuable collaborations between councils and businesses which are aimed at supporting workforce diversity. So for example, in Kirklees, the council had worked in partnership with a number of local businesses, including SMEs, to form the Diversity Equals Innovation Network, which was championing diverse workplaces and monitoring local workforce diversity. Bradford Council worked with the accountancy and consultancy firm Grant Thornton to produce an inclusive employers toolkit which supports local employers to become more inclusive, including providing them with a method of self-evaluation and data collection. Leeds Council have worked with Diverse and Equal and Wild Digital to conduct research and develop recommendations to increase diversity in the technology sector, with one of the goals being that more diversity will lead to greater innovation and growth. And then through desk research and examples collected from the ICC cities across Europe, we also highlighted a number of international examples of local government and businesses working together. For instance, cities in Portugal have developed a guide for local businesses on hiring migrants with recommendation, advice, good practices and legal information. And you'll find more of these in the report. We also captured some examples of work that businesses are doing which is directly supporting cohesion in particular places and across the country. Some of the best examples include the Co-op Group, which actually developed its prototype in Manchester, which is the home of the Co-op, and developed an online platform to coordinate volunteering opportunities for staff and interested members of the public, and which helps connect community groups with those who want to support them in various ways. In the Swansea area, the energy services company Gower Gas and Oil Services has led a variety of initiatives to address social isolation locally, including coordinating a local isolation support group. And I know Julie will tell you more about that when she speaks. And then in Kirklees, there's been a number of businesses, including XYZ Law, who provided support for the Joe Cox Foundation, whose work focuses on developing stronger, more compassionate communities. So I think from examples like these, we've been able to put together a series of recommendations, which I'm just going to share with you quickly. These are intended really as key ideas and principles to shape how business and local authorities can approach this work rather than an exhaustive list. And we divided these under 3 headings, according, roughly speaking, to what businesses can do internally, what they can do externally, and what local authorities can do to support. So the first one is really around business as an engine of cohesion. Because businesses and workplaces in themselves can be really important meeting places for bringing people together. They're often the places in which we're most likely to meet and interact in a meaningful way with people from very different backgrounds from us. And they're places in which newcomers, including migrants and refugees, often begin to make connections and put down roots. And there's some really good guides on diversity in the workplace and enabling the integration of migrants that is included in the report. And I think in this sense, business can be a real engine of cohesion, and they can maximise the positive impact they have in this by recruiting a diverse body of staff and that reflects the diversity of the community in which a business operates. They can promote a really inclusive culture through cohesion-aware management, which means fostering a climate of openness and trust, supporting meaningful interactions between people of all backgrounds across the workforce, you know, by making sure shared spaces aren't separated by status or by function, and ensuring workplaces aren't segregated unintentionally, as could happen, for instance, if nationalities, genders, and or ethnicities end up being concentrated in certain teams. And then enabling minorities and diverse groups to lead innovation, because this leads, amongst other things, to better understanding of the needs of diverse communities and an increased awareness of market and product opportunities that might otherwise be missed. But otherwise, of course, businesses can, in the ordinary course of their operations, be an engine of cohesion, in that many businesses are themselves spaces in which people come together, or through which people and communities interact in meaningful ways, you know, shopping centres, leisure centres. Another of the issues raised of the course of the work is how can they do more of this? And here we are recommending the businesses think about what more they can do to invest in social infrastructure in the local community. And this means thinking about how their own premises are used to enable people to meet. Do they support welcoming, inclusive shared spaces? How they can use their premises in community-facing ways to support better interaction, to support the communities around them. So there are also many ways in which businesses can work to support externally. And there's plenty of instances of this already happening, but we think that this could be encouraged to be a much more common practice for businesses. To be linked, for example, with or twinned with a local community group or charity through which they could provide sponsorship. And I think one of the things to remember about this is that a relationship like this is a valuable end in itself. You know, the relationship between a business and a community group is a part of that vital social infrastructure, and it's likely to provide benefits for the business as well as the community group, as over time it becomes more connected into and embedded in the community around it. And then businesses can also support social cohesion through employee volunteering. I know this is already commonplace, but employee volunteering could very easily be more targeted in a way that aids charities, community groups and hubs that support community life and bring people together. And at the same time, employee volunteering can connect employees to the community and to those from different backgrounds to them. Other ways are through localising their supply chain. So Manchester, for example, had some fantastic had a fantastic story about how they've really localised their supply chain over the last couple of years. And that really helps to strengthen economic and social network, which can be really invaluable. And then it's really about sort of evaluating that cohesion impact. Are we having the impact we think we're having? And I think local authorities have a key role to play here. So when we looked at the role of local authorities, because of the inherently place-based nature of social cohesion, and because local authorities often understand the needs of their communities and typically recognise the importance of cohesion because they can see up front the benefits, they've got a really central role to play. And they can play this role by providing real place-based leadership and a very clear strategy for action, and a clear set of asks for businesses as to what they can feasibly do to support some of these key objectives. And many of the local authorities that we work with were already doing this and nurturing this locally. They can incentivize and encourage businesses to act through really highlighting cohesion outcomes in their approach, and by recognizing the businesses that do this well through some kind of a reward or accreditation. And then finally, they can create an evaluation framework based on those identified local cohesion needs that can support businesses to help capture and measure what they're doing. And I think within this, it's really important to point out the capacity limitations, particularly of small and micro businesses. And that was one of the things that came up very strongly in the research, that local authorities could probably do more to really support SMEs to connect more locally. So this has been quite a small, quite a modest piece of work, but we're keen to build on it and to think about where else it could go. So some of our reflections on what we've learned over the course of the conversations, I think one thing that's been really clear is that businesses already do a whole range of things which support cohesive communities, but they often don't realise that they're doing it. And that one of the reasons for that is that because I think we really lack a common framework for talking about and valuing this work. And hopefully this report is the beginning of addressing some of that, but I think we've also got more work to do on that. I think very clearly there needs to be greater collaboration between local government and businesses, and that would lead to greater cumulative impact in particular places. And I think that came through very strongly in all of the roundtable discussions we held. And I think it was also really clear that everybody would value that, that business are champing at the bit, if you like, to be able to play a greater role. And then we need to really take into account small businesses and their strengths and capacities, and that there's a tendency to leave them out of the conversation when it comes to social value, or ask them to engage with a bureaucracy that they often don't have the capacity for. So just to conclude, in terms of taking this forward, we see this very much as the beginning of a conversation. We obviously hope businesses and local authorities can take up some of the key recommendations in this report, but it's really intended to be an opener to this conversation and a wider piece of work, really. We think it needs to be made as easy as possible for businesses to do more of this and to do more work in this space. So we think there's scope here to develop a much more substantive framework that might include a full menu of actions and initiatives through which businesses can support social cohesion, how to easily align with local cohesion priorities and objectives, and how to capture, measure and evaluate this work and to incorporate it within existing social value frameworks. So we're really interested in working with partners in the business world or further afield that would like to work with us in taking this agenda forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jo. Moving on to our speakers, I'll introduce our first speaker, Lord Steve Bassam. Lord Bassam is co-director of business in the Communities Place programme. He chaired and authored a report on the future of seaside towns, which argued for improved connectivity and levelling up. Over to you, Lord Bassam.
Hi, it's great to join you this morning. I'm only sorry. It's great to join you all and to follow Jo's excellent presentation. It's interesting to me because the work that has been done sort of mirrors and reflects partly some of the work we've been doing in BITC with our task force, which is looking at place and the contribution that business can make in place to bringing about transformative change. And we're not far off reporting now, and we'll have quite a number of recommendations which focus on that point. And what I like about the report that Joe's presented on today is its positive approach to the subject. And in particular, I really like the focus on diversity and inclusion. My view has always been that if you want to have a diverse workforce that contributes and plays its part fully in the development of a business, then you've got to go out and make it happen. And for me, I think the report underlines the importance of that. Because as the report says, workplaces are a site of intercultural interactions. And we neglect that thought at our peril, really, because it is absolutely the case. But if you want to invest in improving diversity, getting something from it, and making it and seeing it as being a very positive thing, then you've got to go out and do it. And the report sort of encourages that. And I think that's a very positive thing at this time when, you know, whether we like it or not, we have been through a really difficult couple of years where certainly at the outset there was a desire to try and bring people to a common place and put on one side sort of social division and so on, and try and act in all of our interests to deal with COVID. So I do think that's really important, and getting the inclusive culture in place by sort of encouraging sort of social cohesion, I think is another really important factor. So I like the way the report focuses on that, and you know the desire and the push to get minorities at the front of the queue when it comes to innovation, I think is very important as well. Too many of the communities that we looked at in the House of Lords Select Committee on left behind seaside towns were monocultural, they were white. And you could tell actually from talking to people just how inward looking the culture of those communities was. And that was a problem. And you know, I think that we need to be much more proactive in encouraging inclusion and diversity in those communities, and we need to encourage people to sort of take a much more positive view of it. The other thing I really like about the report is its desire to promote business as a community partner. Too often, I think, in public discourse, we see businesses as being a problem, as a disabler, as organisations that are only there out for profit. And I think that's a narrow view. I think we can look at businesses particularly as sort of being very helpful and constructive in bringing people together and playing a role in transformative change. If we look at it through that frame, then I think we can get much more from our interaction with business and see them as community partners. And the other point that's very strong in the report is the role of local authorities, who are the glue. They are the convening organisation. They are those that can bring people to a common place. And that's why they are resilient, actually, even though they've been through a difficult time. And that's why I think we need to place much more value on them, because they can play that leadership role and they can incentivise businesses to act. And that's one of the things that we've found in our task force inquiry, and one of the things that we're focusing on. So, Shalini, I'm going to leave it there. I think I've made a few introductory comments that should set some thoughts going, but I really welcome this report. I think it's very strong, and although Joe was very modest about its sort of length, there's a lot of content there actually, and certainly something that we want to help share and encourage people to think through those issues, because I think they do have a strong bearing on what we can do.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lord Basson, for your endorsement, and we look forward to reading your upcoming report too. Our next speaker is Amelia Quist. Amelia is the Head of Policy Research at the Federation of Small Businesses. Amelia authored and published a report which looked at the contributions small firms make to their communities.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Very excited to be on the panel today to talk about a topic which I'm very passionate about and proud to represent FSB and our members on. For those who don't know, FSB provides a national voice for the UK small businesses and the self-employed. We have around 160,000 members. And the acts of kindness on the part of small businesses were common stories that emerged during the pandemic. Our research found that 57% of small business leaders carried out a community role during the pandemic, and 30% prioritised and supported vulnerable customers, with nearly a quarter of small firms either donating provisions to local food banks, and many provided support to key workers. Small businesses are not only part of their communities, but they have an acute awareness of the local issues in which surround them, which we've kind of already heard about this morning, and which may explain why our 2019 research found that 80% of small businesses have volunteered and or contributed to a local community organisation or charitable cause. So a few years on, it's great to see today's report discover similar behaviours amongst the small business community. And we also found in our previous research that 42% of our members volunteer, contribute or support a school, college or youth organisation, highlighting the critical role that small firms can play in tackling some of society's biggest challenges, such as social mobility and increasing the skills gap. Now, benefits to communities can be delivered through the vehicle of small business, and this may range from integrating people from other cultures, increasing support for mental health, and supporting those with disabilities, and reintegrating people that have fallen out of the community. Now, a greater share of workers in small firms and in self-employment come from groups that are likely to face challenges entering and remaining in the labour market, such as disabled people, older workers, and those with low levels of educational attainment. And this is due to the greater informality of employment in small firms. And it's vital that small businesses remain at the heart of the levelling up agenda, which was mentioned earlier as well. Small businesses can play a key role in the implementation of place-based strategies, the identification of skills gaps, improvements to transport links and digital infrastructure all have a particular geographical importance to small firms, which is integral to building strong communities. So separating place and policy may not only lead to ineffectual solutions in these areas, but it may also impact the ability of small firms to tackle a number of social challenges, such as loneliness and the lack of social mobility. Today's report makes it clear that business is an engine for cohesion, and that is why policymakers should recognise that small businesses can make an important contribution to place-based social action. And there's some great findings in the report and some really interesting recommendations, which I'm really keen to kind of learn more about and to discuss later. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. That was really interesting. And I think you've made it quite clear that small businesses can have a big impact in skills development in the community and place-based social action. Thank you very much for a really interesting talk. Can I ask everybody, just remind everyone, please, if you have any questions, to post them in the Q&A section at the bottom of this webinar. And I'll introduce our next speaker, Nizam Edin. Nizam is Chief Strategy Officer of Algebra, a technology-based financial ecosystem dedicated to global financial inclusion by focusing on the undeserved and underbanked. Nizam was previously the Senior Head of Mosaic and Community Integration at the Prince's Trust. Over to you, Nizam.
Thanks, Shalini. Good morning, everyone. A real pleasure to be here. As Shalini has said, Nizamuddin. Working currently in financial services in fintech, I spent a decade working in social integration. And so this report speaks to me very, very personally, because I spent the best part of a decade working primarily with the public sector and the third sector in doing social integration work, or trying to, certainly, from young people through to working with policymakers. In the last 15 months, I've gone straight into business. And so this is a very welcome report. I think it covers some incredibly important areas. I like the way it's structured in terms of business taking responsibility as an engine of cohesion. I think that the idea of business with community is incredibly important, and then of course the local authorities to facilitate and enable environments. I wanted to focus on a couple of things from my end, just to bring out, I think, experientially, hopefully some of which will be useful to those who are in our audience today. One which is, I think what's really nice about the report that really comes through for me is there's no rocket science in there, i.e. a lot of what we are talking about is actually already being done. I think the last 5 years in particular, and 10, 15 years if you include CSR morphing into ESG, I think the last 2-3 years of D&I, diversity and inclusion, especially post Black Lives Matter, really forcing businesses to ask questions about their role in society, has created an environment where a lot of activity is being done or being looked at. And I think what the report really nicely does is brings that together under a frame which is equally complementary. And so when I think about the report writing about diversity of staff, it's fairly well documented that actually having a diversity of thought within your business allows you to cater for your consumers in a far more clear way. And as we become increasingly more interconnected, and of course we're seeing the effects of our interconnectedness with what we're seeing in Ukraine and some of the supply chain issues also with Brexit, the world is incredibly interconnected. And so therefore cohesion is no longer a nice to have, it's absolutely a necessity for us to be able to take that interconnectedness to the next level with the people as well as the business. And so on one end, I think the need to have a diversity of staff across the business connects into the EDI and the diversity inclusion priorities that a lot of businesses have been focusing on the last few years in particular, and I know many have been doing it beforehand, but this takes it to another level, because I think what this does, it talks about actually belonging, and within D&I debates and discussions, people often say, yeah, it's great to have diversity, it's great to have inclusion, but actually those things alone, where are they heading to? And where we're all heading to is this notion of belonging, creating a space where difference is reconciled and mitigated easily. And so I think what we've done here through this, the beginning of this work, is actually create an evolutionary chapter of existing work. And I think that's fabulous, frankly, and should be lauded and be further encouraged. And then of course, how do we create inclusive, friendly environments within the workplace? I think that's fantastic. And then again, just to reiterate the point, because it's worth making, in my own company that I joined, which is a digital financial institution that looks at engaging and serving diverse communities in a really inclusive way. So really from the beginning and the foundation of the company, we've been thinking about how do we as a company have the culture internally? So how do we make sure we have diversity within the business? How do we make sure we create an environment where you can bring your whole self and also into the product design, right? So how do you combine your lived experiences with your learned expertise? Again, businesses are grappling with this because it's no longer a nice to have, it's absolutely business critical, because of how the consumer demographics are changing, but also how consumer demands are changing. And I think that's also something that's really important to note. We now have generations coming through, future consumers. If we're thinking purely in a business hat, wearing a business hat, you have future consumers coming through, especially younger members of society, whether we call them Generation Z or millennials. Their expectations on businesses are higher, right? So our own research as Algebra has shown that, and this is a group of over 4,000 across the country, more than 50% of the people that we surveyed up and down the country from very different backgrounds are demanding ethical services and sustainable services from their banking providers, and they're willing to change to get that. And so I think that's another equally important point here. This isn't a, hey, this is a lovely piece of work, businesses, will you please join us? It's if you don't do it, frankly, actually, you're not going to be a very good business in the future. And so I think the framing of putting this as a future-proofing the business is incredibly important. And then I think this applies equally to business to consumer, i.e. people, and also business to business, which I think is incredibly important. And then the community piece I just wanted to touch on really quickly, which is to say, building really sustainable partnerships with community groups, again, I think is being expected of companies and businesses, which I think is a wonderful thing to be happening. And us as a company, for example, our product actually is released to the public in June, but for the last 18 months, we have been building partnerships with community groups, looking at addressing challenges, but also being good for business, right? So these are both efforts and I think finding the right balance here is incredibly important, because otherwise companies get accused of greenwashing, they get accused of reputation laundering. And so doing it in the right way from the very beginning, if done well, can be good for both social cohesion. And social cohesion, isn't just a case of bringing two sets of people who are different together. You also have to address historic systemic issues which may be causing a more disadvantage for one community over another. So I can give you examples for us. We know that there's a gendered issue when it comes to financial well-being. And so we have these monthly events called Chai Mama, which are designed for mothers in particular, but women from all backgrounds, to join us and take part in financial well-being classes. And we do that in community groups. And even though we're a digital institution, we physically go and meet communities. And so, and that's just a case of, and the feedback has been phenomenal, just to be clear. The feedback has been fantastic. People are really grateful in this day and age where you have faceless apps which are emerging, which are designed to do good, but that connection is being lost. And actually, what this entire frame allows is for companies in a digital world to continue engaging with consumers, which is what they want, on that more humane, personal level. And so I'll stop there, conscious of time, and happy to answer questions on every element of this, but a big positive from me, and looking forward to taking this work further.
Thank you, Nizam. Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about how this interconnectedness is absolutely business critical. And thank you for sharing that example of your business working in the community. Our next speaker, Katie Nightingale, is an Associate Director at Grant Thornton. Through her career, she has advised leadership teams on all aspects of the people agenda and thrives on supporting organizations to design and embed change programs that have a positive impact on their people. She is also a member of the advisory panel for the 5% Club, which supports emerging and diverse talent to prepare for the future. Thank you, Katie.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Really pleased to be part of this launch of this report. And reading it, I was so pleased to see the really practical guiding principles for employers to think about. It's a huge passion of mine. It's a huge passion of Grant Thornton. We've done a lot of work as an employer, particularly around social mobility, because we know that drives diversity through our business, which makes us more prosperous, more profitable, which we know is the case. But we want to kind of share that with employers as well. We want to see others, not only kind of, we are a slightly larger employer, but, to Amelia's point around small and medium enterprises, it's so important that everyone plays a part in this. And I think, as Nizam said around the recent social conversation, it has been forcing employers to think differently and revisit their kind of inclusion agenda and what they're doing in this space. And this is really welcome, this report, to kind of really feed that conversation further and really think about those practical steps that every employer can take to increase that diversity, not only kind of within their own people, but also to think about that broader piece around the suppliers that they connect with to support that, and also the communities. And part of the work that we've done with Bradford Council that's been featured in the report is really that kind of that important part that local authorities play in this, and that leadership to set the example, that shining light for social cohesion, because obviously they support the community that they're in, and I think it's so important to make sure that they can support that. And the work that we did with Bradford Council to make our kind of inclusion maturity methodology that we've been working with clients on more accessible to even the most smaller employers through our toolkit has been really great to see that work done, because we know that it can be very overwhelming for organisations, particularly those that are smaller, to be able to kind of move the dial on inclusion, not knowing where to start, not perhaps having the resources. But it's really important that, you know, every little step is kind of going to go towards a better kind of social cohesion and better sort of diversity of employment. So really pleased to kind of see that as it's gone through. And Steve mentioned something that's really key to me, and again what we do in Grant Thornton is around getting that right culture, and ensuring that that really is truly inclusive every day. And that starts with, you know, thinking about the whole employee life cycle, from how you attract people, how you kind of develop them and you progress them, and also how people feel more generally while they're working in the organisation, which then feeds that positivity through the organisation to customers. So I think there's some really good examples of that through the report, and again people can benefit from that by reading it, but also getting involved in networks as a community. You know, trying to kind of reinvent the wheel and do it by yourself as employers, as I say, very overwhelming. So connecting with organisations who specialise in this, or employer groups like the Inclusion Employers Network that was created in Bradford, in that district, to be able to really kind of share that best practice and look at proven sort of techniques and things that can help organisations. So really great to see that, and hopefully we'll see that kind of really spread the word and enable businesses to kind of be more diverse and help that social cohesion. So just really pleased to be involved and see this grow, and really great to sort of see you know, the different views from others on the call as well. So but I'll stop there. I'm conscious of time, and I'll hand back to Shalini.
Thank you, Katie. Yes, networking is very important, and being able to create our own community of businesses and local authorities that are very interested in taking this agenda forward. So with that, a bit of a plug for Belong, for all of you to join the mailing lists and the network, details of which are in this chat and also on the website. Our final panelist, Julie Jones, is a company director at Gower Gas and Oil Heating Services Limited. Julie is a keen advocate of local procurement for local jobs and improving local communities through work, the circular economy and education in Wales. Thank you, Julie.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I hope you all made yourselves a cup of tea, because I can talk forever on this subject. I promise I won't, however. First of all, I love the report, and I think I found my tribe, actually, because I've understood for the longest time the positive impact the business can have on local communities and you know, adopting cohesive networks. So it's really good to be here, and it's great to see that there's a groundswell, I think, actually, of knowledge and understanding about how we can share wealth and opportunity across the board, and that business is a really helpful conduit to do that. Our company, Gower Gas and Oil, is absolutely thrilled to get a mention in the report, and we have done an awful lot of work since, it would be about 2007, I think, on looking at what we could do creatively within the community. So a little bit about me. My background isn't in boilers or heating. Actually, my background is in social work. I worked for over 20 years in our lovely local authority, and when I had a change of career, I joined my partner in business, and so I brought with me obviously a professional kind of background and understanding about social deprivation and about issues within our communities that perhaps other businesses are not fortunate enough to have had experience, or unfortunate in some cases enough to have had experience of. So whilst we built the business, it was always our intention to ensure that we conducted ourselves as ethically as possible, and we had some fairly clear ideas about what we wanted to do, my partner and I, in terms of offering good employment opportunities. We work throughout Wales, and it's always been our main aim to employ people as local to the contract areas as possible. Very good reasons for that, which I'll come on to, but a little bit about the sort of the community benefits work that we've been involved in. I think one of the biggest projects that we did was the award-winning Don't Dance Alone campaign, which was run throughout the South Wales area, and it was in conjunction with local radio stations, and it was attuned to my desire really to raise issues about an awareness about elder loneliness, and the actual project in itself was a very high impact radio campaign with snippets of information from clients of ours and family members of mine about the impact that elder loneliness has, and it involved arranging events around the area where we did an awful lot of intergenerational connectivity work. So older people would come into schools and they would put on concerts, or schools would go to nursing homes and such on and so forth. There is actually quite a nice video, a summarized video of the event, which I can probably get posted in the chat at some point so that you can have a look at it. But aside from that, we've also been involved in sponsoring sports teams and events. We've been involved in, I've been involved in school community benefits more recently as a governor and as somebody who understands about the positive dynamics and uses of community benefits. I've helped our local school to negotiate an improved package, shall we say, from a very large building company to ensure that their additional needs were met, such as landscaping and such as getting the young people and students involved in some of the community benefits projects, which obviously has a positive effect for the contractors as well. So aside from that, we've also supported and sponsored events raising awareness about domestic violence and coercive control, because obviously that's a really big issue and a live issue for our communities. And as part of our offering during the coronavirus pandemic, we gave over our office space for the production of hospital scrubs, which seems a bit random, I know, but if you recall back to March 2020, there was a very real issue with regard to scarcity of personal protective equipment. And one of our clients, the senior nurse in the hospital, advised me that actually they'd run out of scrubs for surgeons, and I was aware of a group making very well tailored articles in the community, and so we offered administrative and coordination support to ensure that actually scrubs were made of factory standard and taken into our hospitals. So we've been involved in all sorts, and I really wanted to just finish off by saying that I'm very fortunate actually to be a director in Wales, because I think we're ahead of the game. We've got a really enabling local authority who's positively fizzing with ideas and developments, and are incredibly supportive of the notion of small businesses and how impactful they can be in offering cohesion solutions, and that's backed up by our Welsh government. So we're really well placed. I'm very happy to talk to anybody in the chat, or to have further dialogue with anybody that would like any assistance with any projects that they have going. But most of all, thank you very much for mentioning us in the report and having me here as a panelist today.
Thank you very much, Julie, and for sharing those excellent examples of a business working really well in the community and also working well with local government. And thank you for your offer to share that further in the chat. which I hope people will take you up on. If we could now move to the Q&A section, if I could ask all panelists to turn their cameras back on, please. Thank you. So keep those questions coming. Please post them in the Q&A section of this call. Our first question from Lucy Buckerfield. What are particular businesses doing since the pandemic to encourage this sense of community in the workplace with fewer people in the office spaces or shared spaces? Social contact is limited on Zoom. I was wondering if Katie would like to answer that question, and then perhaps Julie.
Sure, so I was trying to get off mute there. So yeah, it's a really good question. I think obviously we've been looking at that as an employer ourselves, and also talking to our clients around what's happening, and it has been a real concern. I think the big thing is really keeping the conversation going. I mean, something that we started doing, particularly after the Black Lives Matter sort of conversation really hit during the pandemic, was really kind of starting a conversation about let's talk about. So we were doing let's talk about race, but there were so many other things where we were just trying to encourage people to talk openly about what was important to them, really kind of creating that, but starting to get ideas and innovation through our kind of employers and our sort of our client networks to think about, well, how can we create that sense of belonging even when we're separate? And I think that has been really interesting to kind of really get that conversation going. But it started to think about, what do we want to do going forwards around, that kind of that hybrid working, and what do people need from the point of infrastructure to support from each other, and encouraging people to think differently about how they work, particularly giving the tools and I guess that permission almost that people managers need to be able to think about how they need to kind of manage their teams, rather than putting too much of a stringent framework around what that should look like going forward. So there isn't a one size fits all. I think it's different for everyone, but I think keeping that conversation going, consulting with your people, what's the lived experience for them, and knowing that needs to change over time as people kind of start to come back together. That's probably the best sort of I guess advice I could give, really.
Yeah. Julie, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, it is a really good question, actually, because obviously we do live in altered times now. I think one of the benefits coming out of the pandemic is that an improved understanding of dynamic working. So people can make positive choices which suit them, and they can work from home and they can go to the office. It obviously depends on the organizational needs. What I would say to anybody really from a staff or a business perspective is there are an awful lot of regional engagement organizations. I'm very fortunate to be involved in one called For the Region, who are incredibly well respected by local government and by Welsh Government. And I think to encourage a sense of belonging, I would always recommend that people look those kind of organisations out. Make sure, obviously, that they're doing good things. Do your research, read up about them, maybe, because a lot of them you can actually join as a member of the public, or you can join as businesses. They can help you with events, and they can help you drive your ideas, your positive ideas forward for cohesion and integrating with your local communities. I can't recommend it highly enough, to be honest with you, because I do think that people do need to commune together and share ideas, because there is an awful lot of really good stuff going on out there. So I would say it's in everybody's interest. Look up your local engagement hub, see what's going on in your area, check social media, find out, can you join as an individual, can you join as a business, can you join as a director, and get involved, because there's an awful lot going on. And I think the more people that join these movements, then cohesion will creep along on its own accord. So that would be my advice.
Thank you, Julie. That partly answers the next question, but I'll open the next question up to Amelia and Nizam. Diversity of staff, non-segregated teams, and inclusive spaces are necessary steps, but what can businesses do to ensure social mixing and cohesion among employees? And what activities might that include? Are there good practice examples in the report or elsewhere that employers might adopt more widely to encourage that social mixing? Amelia first.
Thank you. I mean, within small businesses, most of our members are micro businesses, so they have very, very small teams. So I think this is probably something that's more a better question for larger businesses, but I think there's definitely a need to ensure that there is kind of diversity of staff and mixing within inclusive spaces, to kind of bring staff together in terms of kind of common bonds. So if there's something that the business is quite passionate about, kind of bringing people together maybe around a fundraising opportunity within the local community. But yeah, I think this is probably more of a case in bigger businesses than in smaller firms.
Really good question. I think I've spent most of my career working in fairly large organizations. So there is a way in which you can combine a few things in terms of promoting the cohesion agenda as per the report. So I think one of the really good things that we used to do in a previous work environment was volunteer together. It really brought people together through a common agenda, and usually was a charity that the organization was supporting. And so we would go out and support said charity, whether it was a mentoring day together as a team. It allows you to not think about your business functions for the day. Allows you to go and do something a bit bigger, a bit deeper. Because I think the really important thing here is how do you, when you're even in a small business, and I'm in a startup now, so it's much smaller and it's growing quite quickly. How do you, and I think about this a lot, how do you move beyond the functionalities of your day job to create spaces where people's personalities and their other interests can come out? And often those are things like going out for bonding exercises. It's about going for drinks after work. But again, even that, I personally don't drink. And so being considerate of how you do that, one of the things I've been looking at recently is doing a tea tasting event with the team, which you can do, olive tasting with the team, which you can do similar to wine tasting. So there are loads of different ways in which you can create these environments where people's home lives or their personalities, things that otherwise are not naturally able to come out. And then you have to factor in people's introvertedness, extrovertedness, and so on and so forth. So it's a lot of hard work, and it requires a buy-in from the very top, from leadership to be thinking about these things, which I think is incredibly important. And I think even with this whole agenda, to do this well, you need individuals who personally are vested in this, who have the intention and the conviction to do something about it, and are driving it from the very top in the business, where it doesn't work so well if it's just bottom up. Because then often it fizzles out at some point, and that causes frustration, and the company is seen as not taking it seriously. So I think there are some really practical things that can be done to create an engender environment where diverse voices, folks are coming in. And that's, again, if I think about diversity, inclusion, belonging, and I think this is where the cohesion agenda fits really well with the existing D&I, EDI, however you want to phrase the acronyms, fits really well, because this is like almost the end chapter of what all those activities are. It's not good enough. It's a bit like, I spend a lot of time in education. It's like you work really hard to get young people from diverse backgrounds, and especially backgrounds where there's poverty, into the best universities, Russell Group universities, Oxford and Cambridge. But once they get there, that's not enough. So, recruitment is great. You've got the people here, but then you need to create a culture which allows retention, because what we've seen historically is people then dropping out when they get to Oxford or Cambridge. So there's more work, and it's almost a, I wouldn't say never ending, but it's a continual piece of work in the same way CPD is for every one of us. It doesn't stop at any point. And so I think it requires regular investment, regular conversations. And so a culture to create the conversation is as important to then create the culture where this continues.
Thank you, Nizam. You made a really good point there about leadership being very important. And that follows on nicely to the next question for Lord Bassam. How do we make the business case for leaders in businesses to want to do this and do more of this?
Hello, can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes.
Sorry, it seemed to cut out of my end. How? Well, I think the report in its sense and what Joe said sort of gives us a clue, and that is you create a healthier workplace, and a healthier, happier workplace is one where people really want to contribute. And, you know, they naturally want to sort of add to the bottom line because they feel part of, they see and feel a shared experience. And I think, you know, encouragement, getting people to see that our workplaces need to reflect our broader society in terms of engagement and participation, all of those things really make a difference. You know, picking up on what Nizam said, leadership, really important. Leading from the top, really important. Bottom up isn't enough in this, sadly. It's good when you get sort of the workforce engaged and they're encouraging and are encouraged by leadership. And just have to make sure that leaders see it as being an important part of their role and that they're focused on it, because it creates a much healthier workplace. And it you know, nobody wants to have a divided workforce. It's not a good thing to have. You want a degree of competition, but you also want and need people to work together and collaborate. And if you set those parameters to what you're doing, then I think people will respond positively.
Okay, thank you, Lord Nizam. Final question, I'll open up to the whole panel. From your experiences, are there any barriers for business in engaging with this agenda? Is it the language around cohesion? Is that a barrier? Or can you think of any other barriers that businesses face in addressing this? Who'd like to go first? Julie.
Thank you. Have I unmuted? There you go. Yeah, I think that one of the biggest barriers actually is the doing of the job, to be honest, because whilst, particularly for small businesses, if you go to enough seminars and enough training events, you will hear people asking questions, well, how can I do this? How can I get involved when it's just me or it's my small team? Or so I think that can be a barrier. And I think the way to overcome that is if people, and government in particular, understand that, you know, businesses have needs which have to be met commercially before they can actually become involved in helping community cohesion. And so incentivizing businesses is very often, you'll find that lots of demands are made of businesses in terms of procurement, in terms of tendering, in terms of actually, you know, their very survival. And so when you ask beleaguered directors and companies, you know, what else can you do to assist communities, or how can you function within the community benefits parameters, that can be very demanding of them. So I think an improved awareness helps. And sort of having directors and business leaders confident enough to make that investment and to see that it is in some way repaid. In Wales, we used to have something called the National Procurement Service, for example. We've got a really big public spend in Wales for the size of our budget. I think that the finance minister recently told me that there's a 6 billion spend in Wales on public services. And in my simple view, I said, well, if that were used up in a mechanism whereby people could gain more work for doing good things, an accreditation or something of the like, then there would be more of a two-way trade. And I think my message really would be getting business on side with, yes, it can be laborious, yes, it can be time demanding, but when you actually become involved in community benefits, when you actually get involved in Cohesion events. The spin-offs are fantastic. Our staff have been involved in every single thing that we've done, and they've thoroughly enjoyed it. They've been dancing, they've made cakes, they've had tea, they've done all sorts of things. They've done voiceovers on the radio, they've done all sorts of things. Morale was never higher than, and is never higher than when we are doing one of these events. It's very well received locally. And so that has a positive spin-off for your business. So I think looking more towards an asset-based approach, you know, what good can come of it, rather than how is it going to impinge upon our business? What's it going to cost? How are we going to manage the time and things like that? I think that is a natural barrier that you as business leaders need to push through, because the benefits far outweigh the demands that cohesive working puts on you. It's worthwhile, it is rewarding, and it brings back to your business real and commercial benefits, as well as being proud of the amount of really good things that you can do in your community. So I think there are barriers, clearly, but we have to think past them and get this done.
Really good points there. Thank you, Julie. Anybody else would like to come in on that question?
Go for it.
I was just going to say very quick, I think, you know, very similar to what Julie said, is that, you know, often the barriers are just, where do I start? You know, this is going to cost me a lot of money. I don't have the time. I don't have the resource. And, you know, I've just got to get my product done, my service out, you know, in that way. I think the best thing that we've seen is actually that mentoring. So where we've got, you know, employers that have moved slightly further on their inclusion agenda, that they're starting to see the benefits from that, they can kind of share and mentor, whether that is a slightly larger organisation mentoring, you know, some smaller businesses, or whether it's kind of connecting organisations that do this, you know, the Belong, you know, all these other organisations to mentor, because I think that's the best way, is really, because it is very scary to be trying to do this and just know where to start. So I think mentoring, supporting in a way, sharing best practice, but I think the role of local authorities to be able to get that message out there, because again, having the time to find these sorts of webinars to kind of attack, again, is very difficult for small enterprises. So anything that will help to kind of really get that out there and connect different employers with those that are starting their journey could be really, really positive.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. There's a comment from Carrie Walker in the chat that says one of the barriers is a lack of framework, a lack of connections, and the amount of time that you can spend sifting through the number of organisations at considerable cost to find the right one to partner with, which can be frustrating and puts management off from engaging. I think that's a really good point as well. Thanks, Kerry. Amelia.
Yeah, just on that point, I think those 2 points in terms of time and connections are key. So I know from a lot of our members who want to get involved and do things in their community but don't really know where to start. So that kind of connection piece of who do they go to, who's going to help them make connections within their local community. And for those businesses that are already doing things, I think one of the issues, Julie mentioned it earlier in terms of procurement. So they're doing all of these wonderful things, they're engaging with their communities, they're employing people and creating jobs, but the ability to kind of mark that and say from a procurement perspective what they're doing is quite challenging because of the bureaucracy involved. So making changes there, I think, will alleviate some of the barriers. But I think on the whole, you know, from a micro business perspective, many business owners themselves are part of their community. So they have, you know, they've experienced whether it be kind of homelessness or challenges in education, and when take on a business, they actually, those issues are still pertinent to them, which drives them to kind of go back and connect to their communities and be good employers. But sometimes they need a lot of help in kind of moving forward. So all the points that have been raised today, I think were, you know, are great in terms of driving businesses and supporting them across those issues.
Thank you, Amelia. Nizam, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, I think about this regularly. I think cohesion as a topic historically has been understood qualitatively. Business generally understands the world quantitatively. And there is a language translation issue, which again, how do you bridge that? By having the right people, the right leaders, bottom up and top down, who can work on it. But I think for businesses to, going back to the question of what the challenge is, in that is a challenge, because I think actually it's seen, and again, if I'm being highly critical of the business community, they may think it's a waste of time sometimes. It's like, how is this going to help my bottom line? How is this work? I've got limited time, limited resources. I have to build a business. I can't do good without having made a profit in the first place. And that's often the way things are done. I need to make money and then I'll do good. Whereas actually we have to flip the equation here, because I think what's becoming very apparent, and we need to engender and encourage this further, is you can't actually be profitable or do well unless you do good simultaneously. And that aligning of the business interest with this kind of activity, and again, cohesion is such a broad piece of work that I can almost certainly, and I'm sure every one of us can, find a particular segment for a business to participate in that will contribute to the cohesion agenda, if understood well. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It's a big, what we're discussing here, civilizational, and you can't boil the ocean individually. And so I think there is a language issue that needs to be understood, and the more easier we can make it for business to engage, to feel like, oh, that's where I contribute, that's where I understand, that's where my quantitative meets my qualitative, that I think would help a lot more business, both large, small, come into it.
Yeah, absolutely right, Nizam. Thank you. Joe?
Sorry, I was just fending off my morning coffee, which is about to appear behind me. Yes, I think those really well made points by Nizam actually, and others. I think leadership and culture is really, really important, but it's also about the argument for social cohesion and the importance of it. And I'm just sort of thinking also about Heather's question from British Future earlier about where are the good examples of people, because I think people get so far, they kind of understand the importance of diversity, they understand the importance of inclusion, but then there's sort of point where they stop. So they maybe have a slightly more inclusive, more diverse workforce, but they then stop at that point and think that their work is done. But I think it's moving past that point and saying, actually now, how do we engender a culture in this business that really makes use of all of the talents that are here, and that means that we can really grow and develop as a business. And I think we've become rather used as a society to being separate, if not segregated. The British Social Integration Survey showed that I think it's very low numbers of people who have friendships with people from different ethnic groups to themselves. So I think we've become rather used to being separated and rather used to being segregated, and we sort of see it as our state, so that even when we're in a work environment, there still is a hesitancy to engage in some of those conversations about, who we are and who other people are, which actually really help us, understand each other and create and foster stronger relationships. And I think people often, we're a bit rusty. We lack the skills and the fluidity to be able to have those conversations in a way that feels constructive and safe and engaging. So I think there is a job of work to do. So, and I think it's about bottom up and top down. I think leadership and culture is incredibly important, actually, because I think you've got a senior team who aren't afraid of those conversations and are able to demonstrate their leadership in having them in an easy way. Then that, I think, allows everybody within the organisation to begin to have them.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Any final comments from anybody? Julie, you've got your hand up. Anybody else after that? No, okay. Julie, I'll give you a final comment.
I agree entirely with what Joe was saying then. And at the risk of being tedious, I would have to say that we're really very fortunate in Wales, because obviously we've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which places the responsibility on local authorities and government to address these very issues, including cohesion and social well-being, wealth building, and being responsible. So we are a little bit ahead of the game, and I don't mean that in any way to sound, gosh, look at us, aren't we good? What I mean it to say is that if anybody has an abiding interest in taking this agenda forward, I would heartily recommend that you look at what's been going on in Wales. Our community benefits programme is ahead of the game. It's a game changer. Our Welsh Government are on board with it. We have underpinning legislation. And we are really rocking and rolling the cohesion in Wales. I would highly recommend that, if nothing else, you tap into it and learn what may or may not be appropriate for your own organisations. And that's really the best advice and help I could give anybody, is have a look what's working, what's doing really well, and do that.
Thank you, Julie. And final comments from Lord Bassam.
Yeah, I was really struck by the comment in the chat box from Carrie Walker saying one of the barriers was the large number of organisations that you know, can be on offer to partner. And I do think that I think we need signposts, and we need organisations that take a sort of cornerstone position really in helping in this, because that does make it easier for particularly smaller SMEs, because you know, SMEs do get bogged down. They've got to deliver a service or a product, and they spend most of their time rightly doing exactly that to profit and prosper, which they need to do. The other thing I think which is important here is making sure that we get the leadership right on this, but also that the leadership reflects the broader society in terms of who's there, and that we get a diverse leadership, because without that, there aren't the role models, there aren't the inspirers, those that are going to drive this forward. And it's really important that we have that, because you know, I think that encourages inclusion and diversity, and that's a sort of broader social benefit for all of us.
Thank you, Lord Bassam. You're absolutely right. We need to get the leadership right. And I'd like to thank our leaders on this panel for your contribution to the webinar this morning. Thank you very much. And thank you to the audience for your questions. There have been some really interesting ideas and some really good examples of businesses working really well with the community. Lots of take-home value, some of which is in the chat, but do also have a look at the Belong website, download the report if you haven't done so already. We really do think that this is the beginning of the conversation, and we'd like to continue to develop some of this thinking and ideas that have been set out today, and continue to work with businesses and local government to enable them to have a greater impact in this area. So please stay in touch. Please sign up to the Belong mailing list and consider joining the network, or get in touch with any of the hosts today through the emails that you've got in the chat, so that we can continue the conversation in the future, and hope we can build a more cohesive future where businesses work well with local authorities and contribute in a positive way to their communities. Thank you, everybody.